On behalf of the European region of the International Federation of Landscape Architects, IFLA Europe, my name is Caterina Golci. I'm the president of the federation, and I would like to welcome you all. I'm very happy to see here people from all over the world. And I would like especially to thank today our speakers, our guest speakers, that they made us the honor to be part of this webinar, Healing Landscape. I would like to share my screen, but before doing that, I would like to introduce my two people that they are going to assist me on this webinar. Today is Diana Culescu, our Secretary General from Romania, who is going to help me on this, and our Executive Secretary, Daniela Micianovic-Fran, who also is helping on this webinar. For some practical issues, just to tell you that because we're too many here participating, all of you are muted basically. If you wanted to address questions, please use the chat. And for to make our life much easier, to whom you address the question. And we will try to write to you the answer, or at the end of the discussion, the speaker to whom you address the question is going to refer to you. Of course, you can have your videos on. It's much better for us to see faces instead of talking to a black screen. So really, I welcome you all and thank you for being with us today. I will try to share my screen now. I hope you can all see it. Please shake your hand. Perfect. So I made just a very small introduction. What is the aim of this webinar and how we thought about it, about IFLA Europe, and then I will proceed with my speech today. This webinar aims to address basically the broader definition of healing landscapes, therapeutic landscapes, restorative landscapes, how all of these have a positive effect on people's mind, soul, and body. But today we're mostly are going to focus on the aspect of nature and the value and the importance of nature and landscape on human well-being and wellness. We are going also to address how landscape architects can contribute on healing landscapes, healing ourselves, and we aim at least to show the balanced relationship between man and nature and how it's crucial when we're talking about that for our living space, our lifestyle, if we want to start thinking and talking about how beautiful, sustainable, and inclusive should be. Regarding IFLA Europe, just a very small introduction for the people that know us, is the European region of the International Federation, has 34 national associations from all over Europe, around 20,000 members, each one of the 5 regions of IFLA World, which IFLA World comprised 77 members. We're cooperating and partnership with many European and international organizations, such as the European Commission, Council of Europe, the Architects Council of Europe, ELCA, and so on. And recently, IFLA, not recently, but the last 2 years, IFLA Europe is officially EU New European Bauhaus Initiative partner. Regarding our goals, and I'm addressing the one that are much more related to the subject of today's topic, is to emphasize the role of landscape architects in fighting climate challenges as fundamental in order to really to talk about sustainable future, to provide really sustainable, resilient landscape design, planning, and management necessary for fighting climate change challenges, to consult and collaborate with European Union, Council of Europe, and other organizations regarding the planning, the promotion, monitoring, and assessment of programs, directives, in accordance always with the natural, semi-natural, man-made landscape and environment, and to participate, of course, and contribute to discussions lately, as I referred to, related to New European Bauhaus or to EU urban agenda and so on. This year, we have been focusing a lot on the subject of nature. Therefore, a lot of our actions and activities, they were towards this subject. And I'm referring to a part of the webinars that we have been organizing and events that we're participating related to the subject. The most latest one is the exhibition that we're organizing on the subject Reconsidering Nature. The exhibition hopefully is going to be launched from autumn, and we will present projects that show exactly this connection of nature, small and large-scale implemented landscape projects from all around Europe, showing really the forces of nature as well, nature's right, role and importance. And with this exhibition, we're always aiming to show really how this can be realistic, this harmony with nature, and how we can use nature-based solution, and how we're thinking as landscape architect of this. You can always follow us for our activities in our website, as well in the social media, and update yourself about our activities. So I will just proceed with the talk of today. I was thinking really healing landscape and how landscape architects are thinking, and I will try just to briefly show landscape architects' approach as much as I can. When I was trying to prepare this speech, this presentation, always I'm trying to analyze some terms. Regarding health, and when we're talking about human health, according to what the World Health Organization is defined, is as a state of complete physical, psychological, and social well-being, and not only as a state without any disease or physical disorder. This was very important to start thinking how we can contribute on that. So it's necessary at this point to consider which is the interaction between the physical and the mental factors and how they influence each other, and which is the contribution of natural environment or environment in general or natural elements, and how it can influence our physical and psychological state. The word of landscape also is more synthetic, most complicated, but includes and is very much related to that, because landscape actually connects people and place. It has all these natural, consisted by natural, cultural, social, perceptual, and aesthetic factors. And this is very important here to notice that when we're talking about landscape, we're talking about the connection and the relationship between people and the environment. We're talking about how the disciplines from the design and planning are related to the social sciences. So landscape is not really an abstract word, is us. This is something really to understand and to think about it. It refers basically really to the links of the nature, how we experience nature, how we engage ourselves in the beauty of nature. But landscape also has many meanings, and is political, is social. And many times, here's a photo from above, political and social inequalities leave their mark on the landscape. Landscapes tend or intended to have sometimes a positive effect on people, like directly to those that are neglected and have a negative impact on their health, on their inhabitants. Landscape also is among the casualty of any war, through deliberate acts of the destruction or collateral damage, or because during any type of conflict, governments fail really to control and manage the natural resources. And all this action really leave a huge footprint on the landscape. So a holistic approach of healing and rebuilding is really needed. But what is important here to note is that when we're talking about healing landscapes, what we're talking about humans play a role in healing the landscape, or vice versa, how landscape really can heal us. So if we accept this really mutual responsibility, we must approach our design holistically in that sense. And if we want to talk really about the cityscape, we have to think it as a complex organism, like is the human body. When we're talking about its good health, we're depending on general awareness, we're depending on specialists that they should intervene when is necessary. On the sketch on the left-hand side regarding healing landscapes, I'm just showing to you that in several years, in order to talk about how we can heal our landscape, we're talking about how to introduce nature in our cities in different forms, in big parks, in small parks, in pocket parks, anyway, any types of green spaces in order to reduce temperature. When we're talking about healthy cityscape, really, we're talking about a physical and built environment that really supports health, supports recreation, well-being, fosters mobility, the interaction, to be all together, and to really give a sense of pride of our identity. If we want to talk about that, we have to design with restoration in mind always, that we're talking about multiple uses and multiple users, and we have really to start thinking about the community and how we can prevent any health issues and problems. And recently, the last 2 years, it was more obvious with COVID-19, but also with all these climate change impacts that we face on our landscapes, and bring into very much in focus all the aspects of our life, and how important is the relationship of the green infrastructure in our cities for the improvement of our health, of our well-being. And the situation really forced many people to reconnect with the environment, at least in their immediate vicinity, in their immediate neighborhood, to start talking about how important is green nature and landscape to their lives. And we're coming to the role of landscape architects. And landscape architects, of course, the plan, the design, and the manage any natural, rural, and built environments, having in mind all these aesthetic, all these scientific principles, but with the aim to really address sustainability issues, health issues, heritage and cultural issues as territorial justice issues. And with collaborating with other disciplines working with nature, we believe that is very important and were the key factors for our European cities, as landscape is, as nature is. But the idea is how we can, through our design, to prevent any catastrophic environmental or social breakdown that might occur, and how we can create healthier landscape that supports really health and well-being, either for individuals, families, or communities, or how we can deal with any intervention related to climate change, climate adaptation, and so on, how to prevent our resources and create resilient communities. All these are ideas how we can do through our designs. Landscape architects, as many health-related fields, think more broadly and holistically regarding the world and the human health. And I'm going to show you that in the next examples. But the main concern, and our concern, is how to connect people and nature to improve our human being, because always we have to ask ourselves what kind of landscapes best promote the health of our children. And here we're talking about a synergy, as I see it, a true synergy between public health professional and landscape architects, because they are both interested about the environmental health and well-being, but landscape architects can really contribute to understand, plan, and manage the landscapes for this purpose. So we're coming to the question of healing the landscape. We should always, of course, work and bearing in mind the United Nations Sustainable Goals. But if we are to achieve these goals, we need to act really more boldly, to act urgently in order to reduce any risks that come from any environmental degradation, climate change, or any conflict in order to protect our planet. But the approach is how we can really amplify this relationship between mind and body through movement, through experience, active interactions. Here I'm just showing several examples from all over Europe, showing this idea and how we can bring nature into the city, meaning thinking about the living material. And here is in our approach really, because when we're designing, we're thinking how to fulfill people's need to reconnect with nature, but on the same time, how to bear in mind all these factors of soil, of water, of air, how we can really use them for a sustainable really design for creating good microclimates and good food. I'm just showing this example from a project of Azanster in France, but also on the left-hand side, we see the many cities, like in Brussels, I saw this poster that they were trying to introduce and to promote this idea of nature in the city to the public, to the citizens. There are many projects around Europe try to connect and to connect nature and city, nature and human beings. We can see, for example, the parks in the Netherlands or another park on the right-hand side regarding the agriculture and how we can really work together and coexist the agricultural sector and landscape from one side, and how we can really make landscape while seeking agricultural performance. Also, their project really how to reconstruct an extensive natural environment, how to introduce water in many ways in the landscape, in the environment, but also how to use any artificial elements to complement with natural elements in a more strategic way. And we're coming to talk about this coexistence with and harmony between human creativity and natural process. And there are many examples. I'm just showing some from the Czech Republic, or a lot of you know about the High Line project or the Olympic Park in London. Most of them, they were trying really to see the city as the habitat for all species and not only for meant for people, and really to establish this symbiosis, this symbiotic relationship between building, land, and nature. Another approach on this is how we should promote this integration between nature and culture, how to link ecological and social value and function of land and other sources. Here I'm showing an example that it was shared with us from Harris P+ regarding a project in New Sarajevo, transforming former modernist recreational areas to productive landscapes. And we're coming to the second question regarding healed by the landscapes. And the interest of the natural environment and health was again increased recently, and increased with the creation of healing gardens, therapeutic gardens, and goes further and further than that. And I'm showing this poster, which I was really impressed by the word bathing between trees, that the Japanese architect Kengo Kuma introduced this idea in order to really harmonize his intervention with nature. How can landscape architects create landscapes that have healing effects? A lot of researchers, they have elaborated, they have think, they have analyzed this. I'm just sharing this diagram to show that this mental map, as it was produced by the following researchers, to show this philosophy on the healing garden. That landscape architecture really feed nature. Nature on the sequence create relaxed harmony, has positive effect on our psyche, on our really body, and on our mind. So we're talking about having a healthy system. On the same time, landscape architecture really affects our psychology, mental and physical health. So the presence of a healing garden can really serve as an additional part of a treatment. And we're coming here to design. We design giving emphasis to the sense of stimulation through color, smell, and shape. There are many examples all around the world. I'm giving just one example from Denmark, from Copenhagen, the sensory garden of Magneten. It was a former parking area, and it was used as a garden, as a treatment center for adults with physical and mental disabilities. The garden really aimed to include sports from all over season and to really be for all group activities and areas for physical activities. The combination of art and nature, I really was impressed by the sketch on the right-hand side, that nature and art really creates landscape architecture. And what is that? But I'm showing this example to show how we can cooperate with other disciplines, with artists. This is an example from Riga Center of Psychiatry and Archaeology from Riga, and shows really how artists can make a difference, can help on the healing effect. This project, they're using all premises of an abandoned building for psychiatric purposes, and they started by the exhibition, and they have involved artists in order to give them, to show to them what is their idea about a garden. But it didn't stay up there, because this idea was moved parallel and afterwards for the development of a real garden on the yard of the premises. Lastly, how nature can affect the society. And I'm leaving an example from Greece, from the island of Leros, where the Caserma of Help, as it is called, a social cooperative from the Dodecanese Islands regarding mental health, really created a multi-functional space for all kinds of activities, a small exhibition you can say for beekeeping and local herbs. But what was important, they were involving on this construction people that they had really problems, mental problems, as well as locals, in order to transform this garden and to offer satisfaction for all sense, in order really through the garden design to unite the history of the place, which is really a good, great one, and nature. I want to conclude with the words of Ian McHarg, that we need nature as much in the city as in the countryside, and that man is a uniquely conscious creature who can perceive and express, but he must become the steward of the biosphere. And to do that, he must design with nature. Thank you very much. Here are some sources from the photos, and thanks very much, all of you, for attending. And I will proceed with our next speaker. I'll make just a small introduction. Dr. Dario Piselli, who is expert in environment, health, and well-being at the European Environmental Agency in Copenhagen, Denmark. And he was previously held research position at both the Center of International Environmental Studies and the Global Health Center at the Graduate University of International Development Study in Geneva. Before joining the EA, Mr. Piselli worked as an independent consultant on projects including the Lancet and Financial Times Commission on Governing Health Future 2030, the UN 75 Initiative, and the Governing Pandemic Initiative. He's presently member of the IUCN World Commission on Environmental Law and the IUCN Commission on Ecosystem Management. He holds a PhD on international law from the Graduate Institute of Geneva, and his main areas of expertise include international and European biodiversity law, global health governance, and science and technology policy interface in health and the environment. Today, he's going to talk to us about green spaces key to well-being. The floor is yours, Dario.
Thank you very much, Katerina, and thanks to everybody. I hope you can hear me well. I will just share my screen. Let me know when you see it. And just give me a second. Just one second, I have the just one second, I just need to
No problem, we need just the full screen.
yeah, it's because there you go. Okay, perfect. Right, so for those of you who might not know the European Environment Agency, we are an independent agency of the European Union. So together with the other sister independent agencies like the European Food Safety Agency, the European Chemicals Agency, we provide policy advice to the European institutions in Brussels on our specific areas of expertise. And we obviously focus on the state of European environment. In recent years, we started working much more on issues related to green spaces and health, out of recognition that there is really a linkage there that brings together our mandate on, of course, the European environment, the monitoring of the state of the European environment, but also human health and well-being. And when we talk about green spaces in our work, we're referring to, in a specific sense, of course, to green spaces as those areas that are within the urban fabric that are designed for recreational use, such as parks and gardens. And of course, blue spaces when it's about also water, marine and fresh water, that are a key component of these spaces. But more broadly, there's green infrastructure, which is equally important. It refers to the network of natural and semi-natural areas that are designed and managed to deliver ecosystem services to humans, right? And in urban areas, this goes beyond green spaces because it can include protected areas that fall within a larger metropolitan areas, for example. They include buffer zones. They include high value farmland, high natural value farmland, for example, restored habitats. And this network is really, really important because it plays a fundamental role both in the short term to mitigate environmental stressors. Think of air pollution, think of heat, think of noise, but also in the longer term to secure ecosystem resilience, to secure carbon storage, for example. And this, of course, has also a longer term impact on human health and well-being. There are many health benefits that are linked to green spaces, and research, there's a growing body of research that is pointing to specific health outcomes that come from exposure to green spaces. And these really go from improved mental health, reduced obesity, reduced incidence of chronic disease, improved maternal and fetal outcomes. And this happens through several pathways, right? On the one hand, of course, there are certain benefits. Think of lower cardiovascular pressure, for example, that is linked to increased physical exercise that can take place in green spaces. But at the same time, even just exposure, just mere connection to green spaces has been shown to reduce stress levels, to have positive impacts on heart and so on. And so it's not just the importance of green spaces for health goes beyond physical exercise. It includes the role of green spaces for relaxation and restoration. The fact that there are spaces that increase social cohesion, and there are spaces for social interaction, which of course has an important role for health and well-being. Finally, they provide support to the immune system. Green spaces have been shown to essentially improve the functioning of human microbiome. And so through this pathway, also they can have positive benefits for health. And this is also another conceptualization that you can see in research, which really shows that not just the benefits in terms of ecosystem services, but also contact with nature as such. The possibility of being exposed to nature reduces stress, provides opportunity for social contact. And this translates into benefits for health and well-being that are both in terms of actual morbidity and mortality, but also at the level of self-perceived subjective well-being, of course. And an important aspect that we have focused on in one briefing that was published in early 2022 by the EA is the fact that often vulnerable groups are those that benefit the most from access to green spaces, including children, including the elderly, including lower socioeconomic status groups, and migrants and asylum seekers. There are different opportunities that and pathways through which green spaces can benefit this lower group, but as this vulnerable groups. But as you will see later, often these are the groups that are most disadvantaged in many cities in terms of access to green spaces. And this points to a broader aspect, of course, that I will not be dealing with, but I think it's really important from the perspective of landscape architects as well, right? Which is, it's not just about green spaces per se and the presence of green spaces, but it's also about the important linkages that we now know exist between biodiversity in general and human health. And biodiversity, whether it's urban biodiversity, whether it's biodiversity in semi-natural areas or in natural areas, has an important range of benefits for human health that are only now being unpacked by the scientists, but that are extremely important to preserve because of their importance for human well-being. And obviously, green spaces are really important for climate change mitigation and adaptation as well, particularly in the context of adaptation. Tree planting and creation of green spaces is not just an important strategy for helping urban dwellers adapt to climate change, but it's also one of the, it's not just important, it's not just that we know that it's important, but it's also that countries, European countries, are really mentioning it as one of the main areas that they want to work on, that they have in their strategies to adapt to climate change, because it's been shown to be effective, of course, in terms of its impact on health and well-being. At the EA, we've started to deal with these issues for quite some time. And I think, of course, there are still a lot of knowledge gaps, particularly in terms of attributing really clear health outcomes to spatial patterns, right? It's still not easy to understand how space and in terms of landscape and differential exposure to green spaces relates to health. But what we know is that the scientific evidence points to these benefits, even if we don't know exactly what the distribution in different spaces is. And what can help us to, at the EA, that we're using to start to unpack some of these questions, is our capacity to monitor through satellite data the distribution of green spaces in our cities and and the distance, for example, of European citizens to these spaces, the accessibility of these green spaces. And particularly the EA is a custodian for the Copernicus land monitoring service, one of the satellite observation systems of the European Union. And in particular, the land monitoring service provides important data on through its so-called urban atlas on things like urban green infrastructure in urban areas, so the vegetated green surfaces in urban areas, on urban tree cover, so the presence of trees in our cities, and so on. And this is very helpful when we're trying to estimate and to visualize, for example, the impact that invasive alien species have on urban areas, the share of protected areas that are within larger metropolitan areas, the share of population that lives within a reasonable walking distance from public parks, so the level of access to nature and the level of benefits that nature provides in different cities in Europe. What we know through this data and through the opportunity to monitor from space is that the average proportion of city areas that is covered by green infrastructure in Europe, by tree cover and green urban areas, varies a lot across different cities and countries. On average, we see 42% green infrastructure. European cities have 42% of green infrastructure in cities. They have a 30% tree covers, and they have less than 3% green urban areas, which is publicly accessible parks and gardens. What happens, though, is that there's significant variation, as you can see. For example, in the percentage of green infrastructure, we go from areas that have 96% percentage of green infrastructure to areas that have 7%. So huge variations. And even in terms of green urban areas in capitals, we go from levels of almost 20% in Stockholm, for example, to very low levels in some other capitals. And importantly, as I mentioned at the beginning, this has often very important implications in terms of inequality as well, because what science consistently shows, neighborhoods, or at least what a growing number of studies is showing, neighborhoods of lower socioeconomic status tend to have less green spaces and often spaces of poorer quality. And this means, for example, that spaces that green spaces may be more difficult to reach, that may be less available, but also can be that they might be less safe. They might have damaged infrastructure, for example. And so, of course, that reduces the opportunity that certain vulnerable groups have to enjoy these spaces. What's even more worrying is that sometimes in European cities, but all around the world, we assist the process of green gentrification, where the fact itself that certain areas have a higher quality and presence of green spaces actually drive home prices up, and then kind of pushes people from vulnerable groups out of these areas. So it's kind of a vicious circle where vulnerability feeds vulnerability in terms of access to green spaces. This is another example from a case study of Ireland. You can see that level of presence of green space in cities, levels of self-reported health, and level of social deprivation broadly correlate in terms of where in the country, which type of counties in Ireland where they exist. And this is an important thing to keep in mind for urban planners, because it can help think of where to tackle these multiple vulnerabilities to ensure that they don't reinforce each other in a negative way. And obviously, this is a very important question at the policy level as well. The EU had a green infrastructure strategy already in 2013, but what is really interesting today is that questions of urban restoration, of urban green spaces, of investing in urban and semi-natural areas is also a key element of a broader number of strategies, not just useful in itself, but also is key to delivering the European ambition on nature restoration, the European ambition in terms of climate adaptation and mitigation. So urban green spaces in this sense are really at the center of policy making. But these, of course, these policy goals require multi-level implementation. This is not something that can be delivered by European institutions. These are, of course, the countries and the cities that should really act upon this idea of improving access to green spaces and the extent to the presence of green spaces in cities. This is very important also because there's no uniform guidance at the moment on how much green space we should have in cities. There are different levels of, the different types of guidances. There are different studies that suggest different notions and frameworks. But I would say that the more, the better when it comes to green space and green infrastructure in cities, of course, in terms of the health benefits. And there are many, many examples of initiatives that have been taken place in different cities in Europe. We have mapped some case studies as part of this briefing on inequalities in access to green space, which I hope you can find online. But for any other question, I'm of course available later and even of course after this webinar. I will close with this one. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Piselli. Thank you very much. For all of you who has attended us quite recently, just to remind you that we're going to have the presentation, and at the end of the presentation, we're going to have a discussion and the questions are going to be answered. Therefore, it's very important that all of you can start putting your questions on the chat in order to give some time to the speakers to think about and answer to you properly. And please also put in first the name of the person to whom you address the question, unless it is for everyone and it's more free. Thank you very much, Mr. Piselli, for your contribution. And I think we're going to have more time for the talking after the discussion. We move on our next speaker, Dr. Colleen Merker-Clark. A very short introduction for Colleen, although I know her for some years now. Is an advocate for interdisciplinary approaches to the sustainable and resilient integration of nature and society. He's trained both as landscape architect and marine ecologist. Over 35 years of experience working in planning and design on the eastern coast of Canada and internationally. Colleen also has sought promoting for nature-based approaches, and currently her work is to advance action on climate adaptation. She's a strong advocate for the rights of nature and for the shared benefit of nature-based solution to modern world problems. but mostly I want to introduce her as the outgoing chair of the IFLA Committee on Professional Practice and Policy and the chair of the Committee of Climate Change for the Canada Committee for the IUCN. Today's speech is about healing nature, healing ourselves. Colleen, we're looking forward to hear you. Thanks very much for accepting the invitation, and we'll welcome you. The floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Katerina. I hope my slides are up.
Yeah, excellent.
Okay, great. So good morning, everybody from Canada. It's morning here. It's my pleasure to join you today. And I'm especially thrilled to see the number of people from all over the world that have logged on. It's a tribute to the topic and to IFLA Europe's organization. This is a really needed discussion about healthy landscapes and why they're important to society in our 21st century. And I'm especially grateful to both Katerina and to Dario to have set up my talk as well as they have. But I'm going to take a slightly different approach because at heart and in the beginning, I'm an ecologist. I became a landscape architect because people didn't listen to ecologists, and I needed to make a change. So Macron has said it well: human society cannot live well and prosper on a sick planet. And as we all know, our planet, our regions, our landscapes, our neighborhoods are really not in good health. So what is really a landscape? Now, Katerina's done such a fabulous job of defining landscapes, especially from the cultural aesthetic perspective, which is one of the current understandings today, that the landscape, all the visible features of an area of countryside or land, and often considered in terms of those aesthetic appeals. But interestingly, for me as an ecologist, a landscape is smaller than a biome and comprised of many ecosystems, many nested and linked ecosystems, including the ecosystem of the human community. If we're going to create and sustain healthy landscapes, we must always see them from the perspective of nature, not just from the perspective of humans. Nature understands that the functioning and interwoven condition, and that ecosystems are the beating heart of nature. Ecosystems feed us, clean our water, and provide shelter. They reduce urban heat, attenuate floods, and stabilize shorelines. Healthy ecosystems provide us with those wonderful cultural, social, and spiritual spaces that both Katerina and Dario outlined. Landscapes, ecosystems, and even habitats, all those linked little pieces of nature, from the large to the tiny in scale, they make sure that human society doesn't merely survive, it prospers. Scale really matters when you strive to sustain nature. And that's why I believe landscape architects are so important to the health of the planet and to the well-being of society at all levels, and to the health of individuals. Because landscape architects, we work at all the scales of nature, from biomes to habitats, at all those scales that matter. And we do it because we can understand how policy affects practice and how practice affects well-being. Others are talking to you today about healthy landscapes for humans, but in order for them to be healthy for humans, they have to be healthy and sustainable for nature. And creating and sustaining those landscapes is the product of policy that enables, takes away the barriers, practice that inspires, and commitments that endure in the maintenance and the sustainability of the landscapes that we create. For those of you who know me like Katerina and Daniela, you know that I've been beating the drum on climate change for some years now. So I realize that some days it can be hard for most of us to move from the scale of planetary global warming to that of individual well-being. However, it's getting easier. Most of us have unfortunately already experienced increasingly severe weather events. And when we talk about healthy landscapes, it's imperative that we understand these and other climate-related crises that are upon us. But it's equally important to understand and challenge ourselves with what we can do about it. Let's pick on just one: urban heat. Katerina talked about urban heat. Urban heat's becoming extreme. We need action not just to create playful landscapes where kids can cool off, although those are important. I'll give you a for instance. In British Columbia on the west coast of Canada last year, 526 people died in 1 week from a heat wave. Now, this is unheard of in Canada because British Columbia is our temperate province. It sits right at the edge of the Pacific Ocean. It rains a lot, and the weather is generally mild year-round. Because of that, most buildings are not air conditioned. The expectation here in Canada, where we're heating up to 3 times faster than a lot of the rest of the world, is that heat waves such as this will recur, the temperatures will be higher, and it will stay hot for longer. We need to be planning for this now, and we need to be transforming our communities to ensure the continuing well-being of the population. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. Katerina noted, I am actually the IFLA voting member and the IFLA special envoy to the IUCN. IFLA became a member, an international non-government organization member of the IUCN Council in 2019. And we have been working across all of the 4 and about to become 5 commissions of the IUCN to ensure that the voice of landscape architects are heard. Because I have to tell you, my colleagues in ecology are wonderful about observing, understanding, and reporting, and they're really terrible about doing anything about it. And they're not used to working with the applied design profession. So it is really imperative to us that we penetrate that enclave and that we make sure that science understands we exist and science understands what we bring to that dialogue. The IUCN has been a strong supporter of ecosystem-based approaches to sustainable development for at least 20 years. Ecosystem-based approaches are, simply put, they're strategies for capturing the value in natural assets, so that when you manage in an integrated fashion land, water, and living resources, you can promote both the conservation of nature and the sustainable use of those resources. The IUCN works not only on the conservation of nature, but it also works on the betterment of urban environments and the security of food and water. And Dario had a note in there about the IUCN Urban Alliance, which, Dario, I think is really an important area that we all need to be interacting with more frequently. When you take an ecosystem-based approach to climate change mitigation or adaptation, not only do you reduce emissions, sequester carbon, reduce disaster risks, secure food and water, improve human well-being, and capitalize on economic and social benefits, you reduce environmental degradation and biodiversity loss. Now, the next tool that's on everybody's lips are nature-based solutions, and clearly landscape architecture is the profession best suited to advocate for these and to implement them. But we also have to keep at the front of our minds all the times when we're talking about green space, blue space, and green infrastructure, ecosystems. Ecosystems have to function. So a street tree on its own is not really an ecosystem, it's a habitat for a few birds. But in order to make it function and achieve its highest and greatest potential, it needs to have other trees and shrubs close to it and near it, and we need to link these. We need to create ecological corridors throughout our cities, and we need, above all, to protect the nature that we already have in our cities. So what can we do as a profession? We can promote the value of nature to clients and colleagues, and to the community, to our suppliers, and to construction and maintenance teams, especially electrical infrastructure teams who really like to cut all the branches off trees. We can protect, restore, enhance, and sustain that wild that we've got left, no matter how big it is, or where it is, or how damaged it is. We can integrate development with nature in communities, on industrial, commercial, and institutional lands, and even in rural agricultural landscapes. And we can ensure that all humans have that needed opportunity to interact with nature. Society is becoming more informed of the economic value embedded in natural systems. But we must make sure that we as decision makers understand the value of those natural assets in the landscapes in which we are entrusted. So we have to ensure that that enabling policy and the processes to support it are in place. And that sometimes means stepping outside the design studio. You know, I've been using this cartoon for almost 50 years. And what's really sad is the paper copy got so yellow, I had to whiten it up. We need to restore and sustain the nature we have, but we need to do better than paying lip service to McHarg's design with nature. I think it's time that cartoons like this continue being relevant. If we make and protect the nature we have, we should make this part of our design ethic, a basic criteria for all of our work, ensuring that our communities are green communities in every sense of the word. When nature exists within your community, you need to do everything you can to put yourself in front of the bulldozer. Well, I don't mean physically in front of the bulldozer, but I do mean in speaking up. We need to ensure that our sites don't require the infilling of wetlands or shorelines, that streams are enhanced, not pipes, and that all of nature is included as an integral part of the site design. And we can do this artfully. This is a restored aggregate quarry that's now used for flood attenuation and as a green space for the community. Here in Canada, an elder from one of our First Nations recently shared an important insight. He noted that most of our society, which is historically derived generally from European cultures, we too often see natural spaces as options in our community. And this is too often how we perceive our world. The environment is there to be conquered and controlled. I'm sure you all know, as I do, that we use the word shaped a lot in our profession. We need to rethink our developed landscapes and realize that we must live within nature. Our communities must exist within nature, not just merely bringing a little architecture green space into our communities as a decorative function. So you need to find a site, or you need to create a design that fits the site you have. You need to find new ways to make that building, that structure, work within the natural site. If your landscape's spoiled, restore it. Think about the ways a building can give back to the people who will live or work there and to the environment that sustains them. This Brighton Beach Shoreline project is in Vancouver, and it is right in the heart of industrial port city. That's one of the biggest port cities in Canada. You can see the railway lines and the freeway behind it, and just in front of us is the industrial harbor. The restoration project restored the shoreline and the creek so well that the salmon have come back to spawn. And yet there are restored forests, there are new wetlands, and there's an enormous outdoor swimming pool and recreation center that's also integrated into the site. There's no doubt that access to nature provides for personal experiences. And I believe strongly that a personal experience with nature, especially as a child, creates a love for nature that never leaves you. Loving nature contributes to our valuation of nature. So we need to absolutely enhance those connections between human society and natural spaces, even within our cities. It's important that we have access to that street tree and to that small piece of grass, but it's also important that we have functioning nature within our city. And we must encourage people to seek out that natural world and to use it not only on the horrible, nasty, not very good days when we've got excessive heat, but also on the great, wonderful, spiritually renewing days when a few hours or minutes in a forest grove on a beach or sitting on that tiny piece of grass can help us renew ourselves, our own spirits, and our own resilience. We know there are great challenges ahead of us. We know that business as usual will magnify those challenges, not reduce them, and ultimately result in damaged infrastructure, increased cost, and little attention to risk management. We know that business as usual is not the path to healthy landscapes for nature or for humans, and there's a better way. And I love that we're all saying, Ian McHarg, 1969, I just started university. That was 50 years ago. He tried to tell us the way forward, and we did not listen. If we had listened then, we might not be in the mess that we're in today. Architecture, landscape architecture, planning, engineering, it's always been the role of our professions, our job, to lead our communities, to demonstrate to new, and to make this seemingly impossible merely practical. Just look at the Sydney Opera House. The planning and design professions are badly needed now as leaders for change and as instruments of that change. And I believe absolutely that we can create that techier, cooler, healthier future. It's our job to do this and to ensure that we sustain the natural systems needed to support society. Before I close, I'm going to share a quick little anecdote with you. I went back to school to do my PhD in 2005 because after 35 years of working on the coast in Canada and internationally, I was really unhappy because my work had not stopped deterioration of coast and oceans worldwide here in Canada. We have the longest marine coastline in the world. And in looking at coastal and oceans health, it was a very complicated subject. And people don't really want to hear you talk about your PhD. And I had a Tai Chi buddy who was a really interesting woman. And she kept asking me about it, and I kept mumbling something. And finally, she went aboard of me one day, and I said, well, I'm trying to figure out what the condition of the coasts are in Canada and what we need to be doing about it with land use planning and metrics for protecting green space, etc. And she said, and you didn't want to tell me about that? I live in Ontario. I always lived in Ontario. But she said, when my husband died unexpectedly, do you know where I went? I went to a beach in Nova Scotia where a friend of mine has a cottage. I went for a week to find myself, to rebuild myself, to get the strength I needed to go forward. She said, they are not your beaches just because you're from the coast. They don't belong to you. They belong to all of us. And it's important that even if we can't get to them, we know they're there and they're healthy. And that has affected me greatly over the last 15 years, and it has humbled me in the work that I do. So thanks so much for your kind attention today. I look forward to the next presentations and the discussions to come. And for those of you who have interest, here's a screen you can grab, and it has links to a lot of additional resources from the work that we're doing in Canada on nature-based solutions, and especially and at IFLA, but especially for the work that the IUCN is doing going forward. Thanks very much. Thanks, Katrina.
Thank you very much, Colleen, for this really enlightening speech and for bringing a more broader view of how we see healthy landscapes and how landscape and nature really affect us. Thanks very much. For all of you, please address questions to Colleen. She will be very happy to answer afterwards. I'm going to the next speaker, Diana Culescu, IFLA Secretary General, and also President of the Romanian Landscape Architect Association, ASOP. A small introduction for Diana. She is President of ASOP from 2016. And regarding IFLA Europe, apart from Secretary General, she's actively participating in So Green movement on behalf of us as any other also issues and topics related to green and parks and so on. She holds a Bachelor in Landscape Architecture from the Landscape Architecture Department of the Faculty of Horticulture, University of Agronomic Science and Veterinary Medicine in Bucharest, a Master on Integrated Urban Development field from the Academic School of Postgraduate Study at the University of Architecture and Urbanism, Ion Minscu in Bucharest, and a PhD in horticulture from the Faculty of Horticulture from the University of Agronomic Science and Veterinary Medicine in Bucharest. In her doctoral thesis, basically she was dealing with the development of quality assessment method for urban green spaces. She's going to talk about trees as significant parts of the healing nature. The floor is yours, Diana, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Just let me share the screen. Yes. Yeah, I will jump in a Zoom. Until now, we spoke about green infrastructure, so we spoke about a larger scale. But then from that scale, actually, if you zoom in, most of the healing elements are actually trees. Trees are important for us, for healing landscapes, and I think everybody is agreeing on that. So I make a presentation about the topic that everybody, I think, is agreeing. Actually, my presentation wants to create a common language, a common ground among us, and also to show what IFLA Europe is doing in this respect, to show some activities. Actually, my presentation, as I said, is about trees. But first of all, I wanted to say that it's not about all the trees or any kind of tree. We have forest trees, and actually my presentation is not about forest trees. We have also production trees, and my presentation is not about production trees. My presentation is about amenity trees, the trees that stay next to us when we are going home, when we are going outside in nature, as we say. But actually, they are trees that we interact every day with. And actually, these trees are have a different logic and a different approach when we are talking about the landscape. Many people, and especially in some countries, public administration think that when we talk about trees, we are talking only about aesthetics and about how the aesthetics impacts the how people perceive space, how well they receive spaces, and so on. But actually, amenity tree, first of all, is judged on how safe it is for the targets. And here it's an example from Sarmizegetusa Regia, which is one of the most important archaeological sites in Romania. And the trees around are actually judged in terms of how they will impact the targets. The targets being usually people, but also artifacts, buildings, and other goods, let's say. When we are talking about amenity trees, either if they are in a forest or if they are in a production part, it is important to know if they are safe for people. We always assess this part, and safety is not only in terms of if they will get down or not. We will see some other examples shortly. And after this safety part, we can assess also the importance, the historical importance of trees, the socio-economical impact, and so on. So we have different approaches if we can have the targets next to those trees or not. This is very important when we talk about health and healing landscapes. And actually, these trees are very, very impacted by our urban life. You have here an example on what is happening in Bucharest, my town city, my city, the city where I live. And when I'm saying about being safe next to a tree, is not only, as I say, in a physical way, but also not to have problems in terms of, for example, the fruits that they produce, and the other parts that can impact actually our health, our respiration, and so on. And not to forget that these trees can also be on the European blacklist for different reasons. For example, for impacting local habitats. So when we are talking about trees and about their value and about our health and the healing landscapes, we have to take into consideration a lot of data. And actually, people know little or more about this data, why they are important. But the difference between knowing and understanding, it's very big. As I said, I think everybody, when asked about trees, they will agree that trees are important in our lives. But other than the aesthetic part and maybe the part where we talk about shade and microclimate, the other parts are not so easy to understand and to imagine. And I'm speaking here, for example, about the fact that actually trees have a huge surface. And you have here an image with a tree where the bark is taking off, so that you see how big this bark can be. But also the leaves have a lot of surface to offer, and actually this surface that the tree is providing, it's a huge space where the dust, for example, can be put. If you are reading in books, some professionals are on the opinion that this surface is really, really huge. For example, Francis Hale says that a mature tree in our city can have over 200 hectares. And just to bear in mind an example, the biggest park in Bucharest has only 180 hectares, so its surface is smaller. The surface serves actually for the dust to stay on. And I will give here another example, Cismigiu Garden, the most iconic historical garden from Romania. And when you assess the trees, you'll see that they can take a lot of dust on their leaf. Actually, it's not only the dust that can be put on the leaves, it's also the water that they can store. And also, as an example, I will show you what is happening when you cut a lot of trees in a short time. This is another example of a park in Bucharest where local city hall decided to make a huge parking, and they did this huge parking. And then we have different images when it's raining, and when it's raining on this boulevard is looking like this. Why? Because in a short time, they cut a lot of surface where the water can be stored when we have huge amount of rain. Coming back to Cismigiu Garden, is very important when you can not only add numbers like kilograms and others like this, but also numbers in terms of money, because money is something that everybody understands. We all understand, no matter which country we are, what we can buy with those money. Therefore, it's very important not only to assess the impact of trees, but also to have in mind how valuable they are. And in this respect, actually, IFLA Europe is developing right now some materials regarding trees. You can find more information on IFLA Europe website. And what this material is talking about is actually regarding the impact of each phase in the life of green space. For example, we have the design phase, where you have to take into consideration which species, for example, to add or not to add. You have the implementation phase, where you have to take into consideration what to plant, how to plant, and when to plant in order to have what you need. And also the maintenance phase, which is actually the longest part in the life of green space, and it should be taken into consideration accordingly. The material that I'm talking about is developed by MedNet working group. Actually, they took our colleagues took the mission to develop several guidance material, but also to develop other instances where we can share initiative information, and we can talk about what climate change, green infrastructure, trees, and so on can have an impact on our life. And just to give you some examples on activities of this group, they were involved last year in the development of the national conference of ASOB Romania, the association that I'm part of. And you can see the topics here that we touched upon last year. And also you have some links in order to follow the materials if you want to see the presentation, the guest speakers, and actually the debate that was at the end. What was important, in my opinion, in creating this common ground is that everybody agreed in this event that we need education for general public. We need to go further with this information and not keep it only for professionals. In order to have a wider impact, we have to create this common language for a wider audience, actually, in order to have great results on the matter. Another example, it's actually MedNet event that took place in May in Marseille, and it was organized together with the French Landscape Architects Association, and a lot of interesting ideas came out of this event, and I will give you an example. For example, somebody proposed not to use maintenance because maintenance means that you keep something as it is. For example, you can maintain a bathroom, but in relation to nature and to trees, you should use actually mediation. And we should have a totally another type of vocabulary, because actually what we do when we are taking care of trees, we are mediating the relation between nature and human. This is only one of the concepts that were spoken of in this event, and also I would like to invite you to further visit the links that I provided here in order to have more information on that. It was very interesting, and for me personally, what was interested is that it's already a new theme that we should have a proper vocabulary when speaking about nature in the city, and to have a common understanding on that. What I wanted to let you know in the end is that the MedNet group developed already other materials like the stormwater management brochure, and now is preparing actually a brochure on what needs to happen with trees in the city. So I'm inviting you to stay tuned on IFLA Europe communication channels, and to see what MedNet Group will develop further. Thank you for your attention, and I'm here for all the questions that you have.
Thank you very much, Diana, for really bringing us the subject of trees and how important it is for our healing, life, nature. And I think really it was very important to start thinking issues that we know, but we have to really remember again and again, and refresh our mind about that. So I will move to our last speaker, Thomas Marquardt. Thomas is representing Vestre. He's sales manager, study political science and European study in Trier, Lyon, and Leuven. And during his professional career, he has helped several companies to develop the general market. He joined Vestre in 2019, responsible for the business development in Germany and several European countries. And he's going to introduce another subject actually here, how parklets can help us transform our cities. We are going to see another approach. Thomas, The floor is yours.
Thanks a lot for the kind introduction, Katerina. I'll just try to share my screen. So, just a second. No, great. So yes, thanks a lot for the kind introduction. My name is Thomas. I work for Vestre, so I'm not a researcher, but I'm a representative of Vestre. We are one of the main sponsors of IFLA Europe. And I'll talk about a topic that's maybe slightly different from the previous ones. First of all, for those who don't know Vestre yet, we are a producer of outdoor furniture. We produce all kinds of urban furniture from benches, tables, bike racks, litter bins, but also planters for more urban green. So I won't talk about Vestre for the next 10 minutes, but about the topic how parklets can help transform our cities. I hope this is probably a bit more interesting for you. Our motto at Vestre is creating caring meeting places, as the focus of Vestre is not so much about the furniture itself, but also on the social impact it can have. And our vision is to create arenas for everyday democracy. So creating social meeting places which bring together people across age, gender, social, cultural, and economic backgrounds. And yeah, the topic I want to talk about today is one of the tools which can help us create caring meeting places, and these are, in my opinion, parklets. What are parklets? Sorry, what are parklets? You probably know them, you've probably seen them in many cities. Parklets are public seating platforms that convert curbside parking spaces into community spaces. So at Vestre, we have developed a series of standardized parklets, which are mobile and which can be combined in different ways, as shown in this short animation video. So parklets, they are a way to reclaim spaces traditionally reserved for cars and to partially pedestrianize streets. So they're repurposing parking spaces, shifting their use from the storage of cars to pedestrian-centered public space. And this can make a big change, as removing just as few as 2 or 3 parking spots can open seating for more than 20 people. So, and also recently when the pandemic 2 years ago very abruptly cut off access to many traditional venues for human connection, we realized the need for outdoor meeting spaces, and a lot of cities started looking into using parklets. Often these parklets are then were built by neighborhood initiatives, which is a very good way of involving residents. But there are also more durable solutions from professional manufacturers, mostly bought by cities. So parklets, they're either installed by cities directly, by neighborhood initiatives, or sometimes they're also sponsored by local businesses. So what can parklets add to communities? Why do we actually need parklets? It's the important question. So there's a continuing population growth in large cities and the associated densification of inner city areas. This leads to an increasing lack of green and open spaces in many urban districts. So public space is becoming a scarce commodity. And this brings up the question, which areas in the city can be transformed into meeting places? And since street space, this is a municipal area, and this is a traffic zone which is reserved for the public. This means there's a lot of potential for transformation here. With regard to the current distribution of street space, it can be said that the accessibility and the use of this public space must be viewed quite critically in several respects. For one, many public spaces are characterized by compulsory consumption. And furthermore, a large part of public space is used exclusively as parking space for cars. And also walking is the most widespread form of mobility in large cities like Berlin, where I'm based, and the number of journeys made by car is decreasing from year to year. Still, more than half of the street space, exactly 58%, is currently available for motorized transport. And parking space in particular is highly underused. is a highly underused area, as a car is not used for 23 hours a day on average, but takes 12 square meters of public space. So the question is, how can this monofunctionality of parking space be transformed into polyfunctionality so that more people can benefit from its use? And we believe that parklets are a great tool which can help to transform parking space to meeting spaces for pedestrians, but they can also provide space for more bike parking, very important, but also something that's we just heard is getting more and more important, provide space for more urban green. Parklets, so the transformation of parking space to a meeting space is often a process that takes a couple of years, and it often starts with a pilot phase. Traffic calm streets are often just empty streets, which are not very appealing for people. So no one wants to hang out in empty streets. So to transform them into a social meeting place, we need to offer lingering possibilities and outside green. And both can be provided through temporary parklets. In our experience, parklets are almost always introduced as a temporary solution. However, very often they evolve into something more permanent. And so sometimes pilot phases are extended and the parklets, they turn into a permanent solution, or they are the first step in a transition to a street from a busy street to a pedestrian zone. And I think this is important to see. See it as a tool that often evolves from something temporary into something permanent. Now I'd like to shortly show you 2 case studies, 2 examples where we've used parklets. First one is from Berlin, where we've set up about 20 parklets in a busy street in the trendy district of Kreuzberg was the end of 2018. In this case, the traffic was not calmed, only the amount of parking spaces got reduced. This project got a lot of attention in the media, also quite a lot of negative attention, because many local businesses, they were worried about the loss of parking space. We observed this also in other cities where we set up parklets, that shops and businesses are very critical and worried customers would stay away. However, I'd argue that this fear is often a fear of change, because statistics actually show that only very few people use their cars for shopping in city centers. So this was a pilot project, took 12 months, and afterwards the city evaluated the project, and it did also a citizen participation. And they came to the conclusion that they wanted to transform the street into a pedestrian area. And it's supposed to look like here on this picture. It will still take a couple of years until it will be built like this, with a small creek, big play area for kids. And the only street that will be there is a bike path. And I think that's a nice example that shows how parklets are first step in a transformation phase from a busy street to a permanent pedestrian zone, which will hopefully be in a few years. Second example is the city of Oslo. City of Oslo dedicated itself to a very ambitious climate strategy. They want to cut the city's greenhouse gas emissions by 95% in 2030 compared to 1990 levels. And this strategy also includes a strong reduction of cars in the city center. Several streets became car-free, and the amount of parking lots was strongly reduced, as you've seen in a picture where several parking lots were replaced by parklets. We have set up about 35 parklets in three streets in the city center. They were supposed to be there for 2 years. The 2 years are already over now. They're still there, and there are currently no plans of removing them. So just another example how temporary car parklets become a more permanent solution. The long-term plan is to turn those streets into permanent pedestrian areas. And the feedback from the city is extremely positive, and they're currently planning to set up parklets in 2 more streets. So overall, I think we can say urban mobility is changing. We have more e-bikes in general, more people on bikes, more shared bikes. We have more scooters, as you've seen in this picture. We have more shared cars, and overall the amount of people using cars for inner city transport is declining. So how to react to this change? This is one of the big questions cities, urban planners, and landscape architects will have to deal with in the coming years. So yeah, to conclude, I'd like to say parklets are much more than a piece of furniture. They are a tool which can help us push the transformation to a fair distribution of public space. Because when you remove a number of private vehicles in the city center, the possibilities for a more vibrant and diverse city center, they will start growing. Thanks a lot for your attention.
Thank you very much, Thomas, for your presentation. Really gave us another aspect of how we want our cities in the futures to be. And you have addressed the issue of mobility, which really I found it very interesting. Let me conclude and make a small summary of what has been heard in order to give the floor to for a small discussion. So basically what we heard today is about the importance of balance between nature and man, and how really green spaces are important, network really of natural, semi-natural areas to deliver ecosystem services. And Dr. Piselli was really addressing the issue and the accessibility of green spaces. And I think Thomas also, by the way of talking regarding mobility, you addressed this issue of accessibility, I believe. And also how we're talking about vulnerable groups, and these groups are basically the ones that suffer more in order not to be able to access green spaces, but also not to have probably green spaces in the neighborhoods. And what is also, we saw a lot of statistics and researches that at least they are done till now by the EA, and the work that has to deal with green spaces and human health. And I was really impressed by seeing all these cities and how the percentage of green spaces that they have in the green infrastructure, and how is important really to address the issue of leisure and how is all this green is connected with deprivation areas. But I was really, probably we go later on the questions that we had regarding the policies. And thank you really, Colleen, for addressing the issue, as I said, in a broader scale of healthy landscapes and how we're perceiving nature, and bringing the subject really how we can create synergy with other disciplines, because we were talking also from the aspect as being marine biologists, and this I think was very important. And also addressing the issue of the ecosystems and how we should perceive ecosystem, really to understand how they should function and how we should create ecological corridors and connect with the existing infrastructure. Sometimes we don't respect the existing, we just try to make our designs to be visible, and it is very important really to respect what we really have and to live within nature, what you have really addressed. And Diana, really the safety of the part of trees, I found it really very interesting, something that really occupies a lot of people, and the issue of maintenance. Of course, you have introduced another vocabulary that needs to be thought about it, and how important are the trees in our life, because sometimes we're talking about nature in general, but it seems that we're not really give specific terms on that, and how important it is to have a common understanding on the trees in our cities. And to conclude with Thomas, of course, which you brought the issue of the social aspect, which I found very important, and how we can create meeting places, because when we're talking about healthy landscapes, the social aspect and community is really very important. And I found very interesting how you transform all these parking spaces to be multifunctional, but on the other hand, to transform cities and really to make people aware about the different means, how they can really, through your designs, to circulate, live, and really create a community on that. So thank you all for this. Diana, I need your help here because there are a lot of comments on the chat. So apart from our questions and answer, I don't know if you want to start reading some of these and we can proceed with some questions and answers. But if the people are here, the speakers that are here, I will really prefer that they elaborate in their own way their answer instead of us reading it. So
yeah, I think we should first give the floor to the speakers, and then actually it's more like a suggestion on what we should do next, which is very interesting, and we will surely take it into consideration for future activities.
Okay, then.
Also, if I may, I had also a question for Colleen and also for Thomas. For Colleen, due to your position, I was wondering which parts are like very different between Canada and the European part, if you have some insights in that on how we approach these healthy landscapes, if there are main differences or maybe not.
Thank you, Diana. You know, the interesting thing about our world is the more you travel in it, the fewer differences you find between places. Yeah, there are differences of species and geography, but I was surprised my first trip to Germany to see the boreal forests on the slopes of the Alps. It made me very homesick. And when I was in Oslo with IFLA 2 years ago, it was the same thing. It was like my home province come back again. So there are many similarities in our landscapes. When I showed that picture of the boreal forest biome, it's because it does spread across these geographic regions. Having said that, and there's lots of different ways that we do things. And one of the problems that we're having, you know, I don't know what it is about landscape architects. We have an ego the size of a house when it comes to our design work. We're very proud of it. And we're absolutely terrible at presenting it to our communities. It's kind of like, I did it, it's there, I know you love it, I'm not going to say any more. And it's kind of like even trying to get landscape architects in practice to send just a write-up of their work so that people like me can use it and point to it and say, look at that, isn't that wonderful? And market it for them. It's free advertising, it's very difficult. But I think one of the biggest problems that we're going to have throughout the world in the next 5 to 10 years, we're on a cusp of ecosystem-based design and nature-based solutions. And already in Canada, I don't know about Europe, but in Canada, I can see erosion along the edges of who should be doing nature-based solutions. And indeed, our federal infrastructure department had listed that it should be an engineer who hires a biologist. And in discussions with my very dear friends with the NBS team at IUCN that I work with quite closely, and one of them is an ecologist, she's a botanist I hired 30 years ago to do work with me as a consultant on rare species. We've been friends ever since. Her collegium in ecology are saying, you know, we need to get out of our labs and we need to start knocking on neighborhood doors and talking about rain barrels. And I'm like, no, you don't. No, you don't. There's a profession that's been doing this work for 250 years and we're better than you at it. So you don't. So I really strongly believe that we need to be more present in our communities at all levels, at all scales of that political discourse. One of the things I'm doing here in Canada on behalf of the Canadian Society is I'm advising on thriving natural environments for the Government of Canada's new strategy on adaptation. And it's one of the first times this team has heard from a landscape architect. That's not good. That's not good. So we need to be more present and more active. Deanna, I loved what you did with the language. I believe language is absolutely critical. And I've written it down because I have a keynote in a couple of weeks, but amenity trees, the tiniest scale, right? So extremely important, those individual trees, but mediation between society and nature as maintenance, that's absolutely critical, because one of the things that's getting kicked off the list of stuff to do here and get funded is maintenance. So we plant things and then nobody comes back to take care of it. So we have a lot of work to do technically, but we have more work to do in advocating. And I think that's the place, working with interdisciplinary teams, being participatory in these discussions, it's really critical.
Thank you. Thank you, Colina. What I saw here from the discussion on the chat and the question, even if there are not really questions, but there are some rising some problematics, is that all these policies or everything basically that we're doing doesn't properly goes to the lower level of governance, and there is a problem of communication probably, or expressing what our value or needs to the municipal level, governmental, even national level. So this is something, of course, that still occupies the EU, but I think it must be something for ourselves as landscape architects to consider in the future. As you said, Colleen, but all the other speakers through their talks expressed that, how we can really go for it more seriously and think about it, how we can really do it. So this is Diana. Sorry, Daniela. Yes.
Sorry, Daniela. Yeah.
There were a couple of comments about importance of having a good overview of green infrastructure. Comment about interesting maps and statistics, that it should be better known, especially in administration and politics. And there was also a question from Margarita Cancela Abreu. Are some municipality representatives with us? It would be interesting and important for them to hear the huge amount of benefits and services of green infrastructure. So this is something we should possibly take into consideration for the future. Question from Gazal Karkane, who thanks for the valuable presentations and to people who dedicated the time to provide such great knowledge. He works on urban resilient landscape for Saudi Highway, which is located in Iran, and he had very hard time to prepare all the information needed, and hardest part was working with the municipalities, since they did not tend to put all their efforts and knowledge on this topic and were not aware of the importance of the concept for the planet. And he suggested that the next webinar, this person suggested that the next webinar could be on how can we work on this concept, as Dr. Clark quoted, let us green the earth and heal it, regarding all the limitations that exist in the lack of democracy and collective understanding of society in a country like mine. I suggest this based on my own experience, since the biggest problem is our governments, as they have the power and money, not ordinary, even specialized person. And looking forward to hearing more from the participants.
Thank you. I have one question to Thomas, because you're coming from the practice point of view, and you might have another idea. You just implement all these projects and design, and I would like to know how easy or difficult is to work with the people from the municipality to establish them, and what is your secret, basically?
Thanks for the question. Well, I'm not sure if we really have a secret. I think it's a secret we don't have. I think it's more about it works well selling them, because it's a very useful product. There are not that many producers of it, and we have, of course, have the advantage that the kind of parklets we are producing, they are very durable, very long-lasting. So this is, of course, a big plus point. Because if something's put up in the public space, of course, it's important that, it really lasts forever and doesn't break easily. Otherwise, it creates more trouble than it brings additional benefits. Working with municipalities is often complicated because the planning process takes quite a while. Also, we have to say there are quite big differences. Really depends always on the municipalities. There are sometimes small municipalities where it goes really fast and very efficiently, where they say, this is what we want, please make a suggestion, and the mayor signs off, and then we can deliver parklets a couple of weeks later. This also happened already. However, in most cases, it's a long-term process. Landscape architects are very often involved, like, for example, in the two projects I presented in Oslo and Berlin, the concepts were made by landscape architect offices. So they were the ones deciding on which, first of all, the question of how are the parklets supposed to look like? How much bike parking do we need? How much green do we actually want? Do we want more parklets with seating possibilities? Do we want tables and so on? This is, of course, a question of how the parklets are supposed to look like, which colors do we need and so on, where do we want to put them. So they are mostly the ones making the concept. Then the cities are the ones reviewing it, adapting it often. And this is something that can take quite a long time, unfortunately.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you for that.
I would have also a question for Thomas. I don't know which is the most Eastern European country that you are working with already, but I want to first to let you know what we are doing in Bucharest. And here is a team of architects and landscape architects that are trying to do parklets, and it's a very new concept for us. But for now, parklets for us is like and this group is like a group of eccentric billionaires that are doing something in a place of a car. And I was wondering if you have any insights on what we can do or how we can help this kind of initiatives, or also public administration, not to think at this as the exception, but to do it more often and to be like a norm, let's say.
Question. Yes. I mean, it's always the question how to deal it, how to do it, because my experience, actually, most cities, when they want to install parklets, they do it as local neighborhood initiative. So they give a little bit of money for a local neighborhood initiative, which then often build something by themselves, which is a nice initiative. But of course, this is often a product that's not very long lasting. And in this regard, it's also not very sustainable, because these are often parklets which last 1, 2, 3 years. And this is not in our philosophy. And that's how it came that we developed these kind of parklets a couple of years ago. It was actually the city of Oslo who approached us. And they said that actually, if this is always built by a local community, this is not really something we want. We want something that's really durable, that lasts really for a long term, and something that is also flexible, and where we can easily transport one parklet from one space to another one. And that after a pilot phase, for example, in one street, we can easily dismantle it and put it up in another street. And that's how we develop these parklets. Yeah, I think therefore they're quite useful. How to help? I mean, the big advantage is, of course, they are flexible, they last for a long time, and what they can add to communities. I think this is really an important aspect. We have to get better at communicating it to city officials.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Do you like to read one question that James McGregor actually addressed to? I don't know if it is for you, Diana, or Colleen. You can both answer, but it's very interesting if you'd like to read. It's about basically the landscape types. I'm not sure. I think Colleen was mentioning it regarding Middle East.
Yeah, I was looking if I think that there should be any special regulation to make it work. No, I think that we should have a common knowledge at European level that we can work with, like a guidance. I think it's very important to add this. I, for one, have this discussion with some of my colleagues from other countries in Europe, because actually this idea of a common vocabulary, it's actually arising in the last 4 or 5 events that I participated in. And I'm not talking only about conferences, but also workshops that I have with other colleagues. So everybody is, I think, feeling the need to understand the same thing when we are speaking about trees, when we are speaking about what we are doing in the city with nature, what is nature actually for everybody, and so on. And I think it will help to have guidance that can be also further translated in different languages. Each of us can do that, and maybe this will be also a new activity for IFLA Europe.
Thank you. I think we have another similar question here. Oops, it's moving very fast. Barana Staniewska, if I pronounce very good the name. It's about the language and the need to promote landscape architecture as a profession crucial for NBS implementation. And I think it is addressed to Colleen and Diana. If there should be any special regulation to make it work. As IFLA, I believe Colleen can answer on that, plan any worldwide action. I know that we're involved in promotion at many levels, and it gives an example regarding Poland that other professionals practically wants to design our topics and landscape architects as designer or costly private gardens. I think I will give the floor to Colleen to answer that firstly. And
Well, even though I'm outgoing chair for the PPP committee at IFLA, I'm going to retain the position of special envoy to IUCN, and I'm active with the IUCN as an ecologist, sort of comes together. You know, language is very difficult. English is an amazing language because whenever we found new words or phrases expressed in a different language that we really liked, we stole them and started using them in English. And it's made the language quite rich as a result, and it's continually evolving, which I really value. I actually have a real problem. I'm an English minor in my first life. I have a real problem with people who say, no, you have to speak within these numbers of words. That's the first thing. The second thing is on language. We are great communicators. My pal, Martha Schwartz, and I talk about this all the time. Martha says that the superpower for landscape architects is our ability to communicate, our ability to speak to people and show them what we can see in our head and convince them to trust us and let us build that. And yes, we have graphic tools and etc., but it is that communication skill that really sells the project. But one of the problems that's out there in the world today is we have sometimes got the wrong people defining the language we should use. And in climate change, this is also a continuing sore point with me. Mitigation adaptation developed by the International Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change to convince governments to reduce their emissions. But when you actually start to try and figure out what initiative is mitigation and what initiatives fall in the adaptation box, you can spend your whole day spinning your wheels trying to sort things out. It's bad language and it doesn't translate well in community decision making. So it is important that as a profession, if we can't find good language and it doesn't really capture what we want to do, that we create our own language. And that's why I loved what Diana did this morning. I have another friend who uses the phrase subject matter expert, which has also come into my vocabulary because I think it's so important. In the world of today, we can all go on the internet and diagnose every condition we think we have. But the truth of the matter is that we need a medical professional to make sense of it. We can't figure out climate change reading all the websites. Like we cannot research everything in our lives. Our lives are really complicated. And we have to have respect for the subject matter experts of every aspect of our life going forward, even if it's the guy who fixes the brakes on our car. He's the subject matter expert. So it's an understanding that communication is important, and we need to figure out how to craft that communication so that it affects policy, it affects decision making, it affects practice. I don't think that there is a need to regulate it. In fact, I would be against that. I think that we will never get the kind of insight that's coming out this morning, if we tell people this is what you'll call it, and this is how we'll go forward, and we'll all march in step, everything is much more valuable when you have a creative group of people like landscape architects are, who come up with so many terrific ideas, and then we can all steal them and use them until we need to move on to something else. But I think the crux of it is not so much how you communicate, it is that you are communicating to the right people. And you see this as your job. It's the Spider-Man thing, right? With great power comes great responsibility. And I think that as a profession, we have not lived up to our responsibility to be present at those dialogues and in those discussions. So that's where I think we should go.
Yeah, I also wanted to answer this question. First of all, I don't know if you are aware, but IFLA has already a dictionary on landscape architecture. It's quite extensive. But I think that there are many rising words that should be included in a new vocabulary, let's say. And also, I think we need different types of presenting this vocabulary, because books are fun for most of us, but actually they are not so easy for everybody to understand, especially if they are in a foreign language. Me, for one, I'm exploring with some colleagues this idea to have some videos or some like small webinars, if you want, on 50 very important words that can form the main vocabulary in our domain. Just start small and go further. I'm also against doing regulation. I'm from a country where everything should be regulated, but what I understood very early in my profession is that once it's regulated, it's very hard to change. And actually our domain is so dynamic, it shouldn't be regulated in terms of vocabulary, let's say. So yeah, I think we all need to explore what we can do together in order to have these 50 words that we can use and understand the same thing, and then we can add the 51 word and the 52 and so on. We have to start somewhere.
Thank you, Diana, and I would like to conclude with these thoughts, but also one remark here by Donna Rothman, who writes that what we need is to create an applied, oops, it's moving, sorry, an applied international research design network so we can work in teams to connect. And we're believing in teams, we're believing in network here in IFLA Europe and in IFLA too. So really what we encourage everyone here to embrace our activities, to join all forces for really a better and healthy world and planet. So this is my, if you can say, comment from all this talk. I want to ask also all of you, the speakers, to conclude with some remark and to thank you, first of all, for your contribution today. So I'll start from Colleen and then Thomas and then Diana.
So unfair. Put me on the hot seat first. Continue your great work. Continue the interest that you've shown this morning. Over 200 people registered for this webinar. But take what you know and use it to help the broader community.
Thank you, Colleen. Thomas?
Yeah, I can just agree. Continue great work. I think the very positive feedback we just got in the chat shows that this is highly useful, organizing these kinds of events. So I hope IFLA Europe will keep being active, keep organizing also more and more physical events. Now Corona is over, and we'll have the chance to connect and to exchange ideas.
Thank you. And Diana.
Yeah, I always find to be very reassuring to see that other people have the same problems that I have in my country, like public administration not taking into consideration what the professionals are saying, or being over regulated and so on. But it's also nice to see what other people are doing, and I think that this is the most important thing that IFLA Europe and IFLA are doing, taking together the community and giving this possibility to communicate problems, ideas, projects, and so on. So for me, this platform that IFLA Europe is offering, it's one of the most important things in our profession. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. And the last one, and not the least, is going to be Daniela Mitsanovic to say goodbye, of course, from to all of you, but to address the next meeting that we're having, physical or virtual. So, Daniela, you can speak as much as you want.
Thank you, Katerina. Thank you all so much for being present today. It is such a great event, and it's great to see so much interest, but also to have all your ideas, all your comments, the issues, the problems or challenges that you have. We will take care of all the recording that will be available. All the comments will be taken into consideration, and we will most certainly consider for the next event, which we will be planning. Please follow us on the website and social media for the date. We will be sending it soon, and we will be contacting the professionals, the sister organizations, the governments, all those who are important decision makers and policy makers, so that we can make the necessary changes. Thank you all for being today with us.
Thank you very much, all of you. I would like to ask just from the speakers to stay for a few minutes and not to leave immediately, as all the others. And thank you, the attendees, for really the participation here today, because without all of you, all this could not be really implemented. Thanks very much all. Goodbye for the time being.
Bye.